ISIS. Yo.
I can tell when someone's lying. It's kind of a thing.
You read the reality cat. Who even are you?
My name's
What that girl on? Just my YouTube channel. Your boyfriend actually copied me.
His name is synonymous with blues. His music made him one of the most iconic figures in his genre. He is cemented
I've been
as a
doing this shit
legend.
since '98.
And yet, very little is known about Robert Johnson. 29 songs, 2 verified photographs, and hundreds of unanswered questions. Johnson's life, his story, and his artistry is wrapped in mystery to this day, but his music resonates with millions. However, Johnson wasn't always a brilliant
Thanks for the
musician.
candy.
In fact, he was considered to be relatively untalented, even up until his early 20s. Allegedly, he improved rapidly on the guitar, so much so that a legend was born that Johnson sold his soul to the devil so that he could become a master of the guitar. Johnson passed away under mysterious circumstances at 27 years old, giving birth to the infamous 27 Club and adding yet another question mark onto his already confusing story. Robert was born on the 8th of May, 1911, to parents Julia Dodds and Noah Johnson in Hazelhurst, Mississippi. His mother had already given birth to 10 kids with her husband Charles, but Robert was born out of wedlock, illegitimately, and had a father who he most likely never met or spoke to. His stepfather, Charles, was a reasonably successful landowner, but after getting into a dispute with a lynch mob, he was forced to move to Memphis, and Robert would eventually be sent there to live with him until he was around 8 or 9 years old. At
Yes,
that
a
age, he
documentary.
moved back to Mississippi to live with his mother and her new husband, Dusty Willis. In his teenage years, Robert began to gain an interest in music and dabbled in some different aspects of it. He learned the basics of the guitar from one of his brothers, and he was cited as being a talented harmonica player. We can also assume that he was writing songs and singing during this time. But all of this wasn't very appealing to his new stepfather, who wanted him to work on the plantation fields. This would lead to a conflict between the two, and while he was still a teenager, Robert would try and find his own freedom and independence. This started when he was 19. He married a 16-year-old Virginia Travis on the 17th of February, 1929, but unfortunately, she would die a year later while giving birth. Robert was now a 20-year-old widow with a stepfather he didn't like, a father he never met, and a wife who had just passed away. And lest we forget, he was an African-American man living in the South in the early 20th century. Basically, Robert had an intense childhood, and his adult life wasn't looking very good either. This day, all Robert really had was his music.
Huh? Yeah, we got 5 computers. Nope. That's why we turned this way. Yeah.
It was around this time that legendary blues icon Son House moved to a town that was near where Robert lived. All of a sudden, a lost and impressionable Robert Johnson was listening to one of the greatest blues artists of his generation perform live every week at the local juke joint. At this point, Robert had some musical ability, but it was mainly at the previously mentioned harmonica, so he wasn't considered talented enough to perform at these establishments, but during the breaks, Johnson would ask if he could play their guitars. In one of the most famous interviews ever about Robert Johnson, House states that he was terrible and that he was often asked to stop playing.
Look, he's terrible.
Follow me and Willie Brown on Saturday night, yeah, Willie Brown. And every time we stop for rest, so that little guitar over in the corner or something, and we go out.
Taste your saliva.
You know, get the guitar and trying to play it and be just noise in the people, you know. And when the folks would come out and say, why don't y'all, some of y'all go in there and meet that boy, get that thing down, he running us crazy.
Johnson may have been in the correct environment to observe the music he wanted to play, but because of his lack of resources and the ridicule he was subjected to when he attempted to perform, he was in the wrong environment to learn. This may have been the reason he left. He did remarry in 1931, but that didn't stop him from traveling around the South for about a year. This is a confusing space of time that is responsible for many of the myths revolving around Johnson. Some people speculated that he left to try and find his biological father, while others believed that he was exclusively focusing on improving his craft. But the other theory, and strangely the most popular one, is that Robert Johnson made a deal with the devil. The story goes that Robert Johnson went to a local crossroads with his guitar before midnight. He started playing his songs, and at midnight, the devil appeared. The devil took the guitar and tuned it, played a song, and gave it back to Johnson. This was the transaction, the turning point for Johnson as a musician. He had given up his soul to the devil himself and was a master of guitar. But with this, his soul was doomed to hell, and an untimely demise was in his future. The reason people believe that this is what happened is because of a man named Liddell Johnson, who in 1971 said that this was the way to sell your soul, and that his brother Tommy had actually done this. There was no relation between Tommy and Robert, but that didn't stop people from taking this tale and attaching it to Robert's name. At least that's how the story goes. It's obviously a far-fetched tale, but it shows us how impressive and quick Johnson's improvement must have been. The only way the public were able to justify his talents was with a story that was this insane, which in itself tells us why Robert Johnson was so good. One thing is almost certain. Between the years of 1930 and 1932, something happened that made Johnson go from being considered embarrassingly bad to one of the greatest guitarists of all time. When he finally returned to play for Son House, nobody was telling him to stop. He was so good, when he finished, all our mouths were standing open. Johnson took his new talents and began traveling with fellow artist Johnny Shines, where he improved his craft even further. But he still hadn't recorded anything, and his talents were being wasted. It was the mid-1930s, and his second wife had passed away. Johnson was determined to record and make a name for himself. He went into a man named H.C. Spears' store, who worked for the ARC record label. Finally, in November of 1936, Johnson was in a studio recording the first of his almost 30 songs. He would continuously return to record until the summer of 1937. He made okay money doing this and had amassed a small but loyal fan base, but Johnson wasn't a household name by any means. His music had some dark undertones. Songs like Me and the Devil Blues, If I Had Possession Over Judgment Day, Hellhound on My Trail, and of course, Crossroad Blues. Dark themes like hell, the devil, and death were prominent in his music, and this did nothing but add fuel to his already dark image. But this was par for the course for blues. These weren't new thematic explorations, they were cemented attributes of the genre. But people emphasized Johnson's dark lyrics to add to the narrative, even though there were hundreds of similar acts doing the same thing. Regardless, the recordings were done, and unfortunately, that would be Johnson's entire discography, because a year later, he would die. On the 16th of August, 1938, Robert Johnson, aged 27, was found dead. Very little is known about the specifics of his untimely demise. In fact, the actual date he died wasn't discovered for another 30 years when music journalist Gail Dean Wardlow found his death certificate. It didn't have any cause of death, so we weren't given any answers in that department, but of course, there are theories. The first theory, which is the most plausible and the most boring, is that Robert died from untreated syphilis that he had inherited from one of his parents. It was a common problem for low-income families at the time, and it's entirely possible that Johnson was a victim of this. But if you haven't figured it out yet, nothing is ever black and white with Robert Johnson. And as you probably expected, there is a second theory that Johnson was murdered. Johnson had been performing for a few weeks at a country dance that was only 15 miles away from where he was found. Allegedly, he was flirting with a married woman at these dances. Her husband gave Robert a drink, but Sonny Boy Williamson, a fellow musician and friend of Johnson, slapped the drink out of his hand and told him that it was dangerous to accept drinks from unknown people. Johnson was angry at Williamson for doing this, and he accepted a second drink from the husband, which he did consume. Williamson wrote an account about this, and he was a well-respected figure of the blues community who had a confirmed association with Johnson, so it is entirely possible that he was telling the truth. Whether Johnson was actually poisoned is a different story altogether. However, Robert Mac McCormack, a notable blues researcher, claimed that he tracked down the man who killed Johnson and actually got a confession from him. He declined to reveal the name or release the confession, which seems like a strange thing to do. If you were a blues researcher and found out who killed one of the genre's biggest icons, it's very strange that you wouldn't release that information. But these accounts and statements have made this second theory more believable, and a lot of people do believe it to be true. Either way, the end result was the same. Johnson had passed at the young age of 27, with very few answers as to what happened, concluding his already insane life with an ending that was incredibly unfortunate and but morbidly fitting for such a mysterious and interesting character. Some of his friends, associates, and peers wouldn't find out about his death for a long time, not until they looked for him and realized through word of mouth that he was gone. Obscurity. For 2 decades after his death, he remained.
What? What? Can't hear you. Who's gossiping? Oh.
4 missing persons found alive.
I thought I was gonna die. I went out.
You like that, Enzo? I see you barking. I got you through.
On May 8th, 2021, a woman named Malie Perales was driving down the Packer Drive Northeast Road alongside the Rogue River in Belmont, Michigan. She and her 2 roommates were on their way back after a night out, and they were all in a cheerful mood. However, their smiles quickly vanished as they stumbled onto a horrifying scene. At around 2:30 a.m., while driving near the Rogue Hollow Court, one of the passengers spotted a strange figure lurking by the side of the road. This encounter was extremely terrifying, but it also sparked the group's curiosity. And after some deliberation, they decided to turn around, and this is what they then came across.
What the
No,
Stop.
No, hell no.
What the Oh!
They were soaked.
They saw what looked like a young woman drenched from head to toe as if she had just crawled out of the nearby river. She also looked like she was crying, banging her head on the road and waving for help. Malie posted the video of this encounter on TikTok and it instantly went viral, leading people to come up with all sorts of far-fetched theories about ghosts, spirits, etc. However, as wild as the theories got, Malie later posted several videos shutting them down and revealing what really happened. According to her, they kept circling back and driving past the disturbed woman several times after recording the first video to make sure she was okay. While none of them had the nerve to get out of the car and approach her, they did call the cops and waited nearby until help arrived. The woman was then taken to a nearby hospital where she was treated for cold exposure. As it turns out, she somehow fell into the Rogue River from the east side and swam across it onto the road.
She had to have come up out of the water. Yup, there's a dig spot there. So she came up from down there. That had to have been why she was so wet. This was the spot that she had left. I don't know why, what was going on.
After regaining some composure, she also revealed that the woman was in Kalamazoo, a town that's over 60 miles from where she was found. However, she had no recollection of how she got to Belmont and fell in a river so far away from home. From what we know, she was most likely experiencing a severe mental break, where her memory gap was caused by a rare condition known as fugue state, something we covered in our previous video on the most disturbing mental disorders. For those who don't know, a fugue state is a rare condition where a person suddenly loses their memory and starts acting like someone else. They might wander off, travel long distances, or do things completely out of character without realizing anything is wrong. It's usually triggered by extreme stress or trauma, and once it's over, the person often has no memory of what happened. And while this condition is quite rare, all the signs suggest that's exactly what happened to this mysterious woman from Kalamazoo, especially since the authorities later found her car parked behind a random house just east of the river. She likely drove to that neighborhood on her own, but had zero memory of doing so, which fits perfectly with the known symptoms of fugue state. Malie also shared her video in a local Facebook group, hoping to find more answers about what went down. Unfortunately, the responses she received weren't as helpful as she'd hoped, since most people in the neighborhood believed the screaming and noises were just the sounds of a wild animal, like a coyote. But there were a few responses that deepened the mystery, like this one person who remembered meeting her earlier that same night, stating, saw this person between Van Dam and Packer Woods around 10:15 p.m. Friday. Asked her if she needed help, to which she responded no. Another person also mentioned hearing about a woman walking into his neighbor's house, yelling hello 3 times and then leaving on her own. And while this added further evidence supporting the fugue state theory, these responses still left a key question unanswered. Who was she? Malie tried to contact both the police and the hospital for answers, but despite her insistence, both the police officers and the hospital staff refused to reveal her real name. That said, we still have enough information to make an educated guess. Based on everything I could uncover, the mysterious woman in this unsettling video was most likely Mei Zhou. She was a 28-year-old Chinese woman who went missing from Kalamazoo on May 6, 2021. Before her disappearance, she told her friends that she felt like she was being followed by a stalker she met online. Unfortunately, these are the only details about her case that were made public. I couldn't find any clear answers on whether the stalker was real or if she was just overwhelmed by paranoia. In either case, the constant fear and stress of feeling watched likely drove her to slip into some variation of the fugue state we discussed earlier. Hopefully, she received the mental help she desperately needed and is now in a better mental state than she once was. Tracking down a missing person can be an extremely daunting task, but tracking down a person's personal information often isn't. For example, just by knowing your name and the town or city you live in, I could probably find out your address, phone number, make and model of your car, who your relatives are, and much more. This is because data brokers collect all our information, package it, and sell it to whoever wants it. It can cost someone less than $1 to purchase this information about you. Most people buying this information aren't trying to find missing persons, probably scammers or stalkers. If you don't believe me, Google yourself right now and see what comes up. Thankfully, with my sponsor Aura, this type of thing can be prevented. They can identify live stream.
Oh, yeah, I've heard about this. No, I've seen
In June of 2024, streamer Lacey and his friend Clicks were doing an IRL live stream in Miami, Florida. The two were simply going around town and having fun. What they didn't realize was that this stream would end up saving someone's life. It happened a few hours into the stream when they sat down at the Starlight Hotel Cafe for lunch. As they waited to order, a guy walked up to their table wearing nothing but neon green shorts. Lacey and Clicks initially assumed he was just another fan eager to talk to his favorite streamers, a pretty typical scenario for popular IRL streamers. But something about this young man didn't sit right. He was trying to keep a conversation going, but his words were slurred, and nothing he said really made sense.
Yo, you good, bro? What?
The streamers figured he was either drunk or on some kind of drugs. For content, they started poking fun at him a bit before shifting their focus back to their stream. But the guy continued to linger around, acting very odd and saying unintelligible sentences for the next half hour or so before finally leaving them for good. The streamers simply labeled it as an odd interaction from someone under the influence of something or another and continued on with their stream. Lacey later uploaded an edited down version of this stream on his YouTube channel. And that's when he got an email that made him realize the significance of what they had just caught on camera. 2 days after this video went up, Lacey received an email from a man named Trent claiming to be the brother of the guy seen in green shorts. It read, "Hello, my name is Trent Coleman, and my missing little brother from Michigan was on Clicks and Lacey's stream in Miami. He was wearing green shorts and they were making fun of him. He is not on drugs, he is schizophrenic, and he is 17 years old. If someone can contact me about this, I would be so thankful. He has been missing for 3 months, and his case was put on homicide in Michigan." In most cases, emails like these are just trolls trying to mess with creators. However, after some research, Lacey discovered that Trent was actually telling the truth and posted this new development on Twitter stating, "3 months ago, a 17-year-old kid went missing and was put on homicide. Yesterday on stream, he came up to me and Clicks, and now his family knows he is alive and in Miami. I wasn't sure if I should make this public, but I'm hoping somehow this helps him be found for his family." In a reply to his tweet, Lacey also attached an article that provided additional details about the case. Apparently, the teenager's name was Troy Coleman, and he had been missing from his home in Michigan since May of 2024. According to the article, Troy was last seen in Mount Morris Township around 9:30 a.m. on May 17th. In the 3 months since his disappearance, he had somehow traveled from Michigan all the way to Miami with no medication, no money, and no clear explanation of how he got there. This was extremely concerning, considering Troy's lack of vital medication for his schizophrenia was known to cause serious hallucinations. His sudden reappearance only deepened the mystery. With no leads and no logical explanation, Michigan police were left so baffled that they even began investigating his case as a potential homicide. So the fact that Troy randomly appeared on Lacey and Clix's stream and his brother just so happened to be watching that stream was nothing short of a miracle. But somehow the coincidences keep piling up, and what happened next made the whole situation even stranger. Troy was still on stream. Another young fan approached the two streamers and tried to strike up a conversation. However, before he could even introduce himself, Troy interrupted them again and started saying something to the younger fan. He was still talking incoherently, which made the streamers even more uncomfortable and confused about his intentions. During this time, he also gave the younger fan the styrofoam cup he was holding. The young boy quickly took a sip of whatever was in the cup and walked away. Lacey's cameraman noticed the exchange and immediately pointed it out to the streamer. By now, they were convinced that Troy was on drugs, and that raised a serious concern. Had he just given the kid something laced? Not wanting to ignore it, Lacey decided to confront Troy, asking him directly what was in the cup. But to their surprise, Troy's answer was a lot more coherent than expected. He simply stated that it was just a soft drink from Beacon Hotel.
What was in the drink? What was in that drink?
In the drink?
Yeah. You gave it to Lou.
It was Coke from Beacon Hotel.
Like Coca-Cola? Making sure you gave it to the kid.
I gave it to a kid.
This coincidental interaction gave authorities the crucial lead they needed. Troy was, in fact, staying at the very hotel he had mentioned. From there, it didn't take long for investigators to track down Troy and reunite him with his family, who were overjoyed to have him back. In a later interview with People.com, Troy's father, Weston Coleman, shared even more heartbreaking details of what Troy went through. According to him, Troy actually wanted to visit Florida to find and meet celebrities. He did his research online and saved up as much money as he could before setting off. Troy made it to Atlanta by bus, but that's where things took a turn for the worst. During his stay in Atlanta, he was robbed of everything he had. Left with nothing, he traveled the rest of the way to Miami completely broke. Despite the hardship, his family was ultimately glad that he was still alive and well, with his father stating, "I'm just glad he's alive at this point and now can't believe we found him. We all feel a lot better and we thank everybody." From what I can find, Troy's been living with his family in Michigan ever since and has managed to stay out of any more trouble. On August 3, 2013, 40-year-old James DiMaggio invited family friend Christina Anderson and her two kids, 8-year-old Ethan and 16-year-old Hannah, over to his home in Boulevard, California. He claimed it was just a farewell visit before moving to Texas. And this wasn't anything unusual. James had been a close friend with both Christina and her husband Brett for quite some time and was like an uncle to the kids. And since Brett was away for a 3-month job in Tennessee, James helped the family regularly with things like driving Hannah to and from her gymnastics class. However, what seemed like an innocent invitation quickly turned into a horrifying nightmare. It started on August 4 when the children's grandparents called the police and reported the family as missing after not hearing from Christina all day. They also informed the police about the family's plan to visit James. However, when investigators reached James's home, it was already engulfed in flames. Firefighters rushed to the scene and suppressed the fire. Unfortunately, they were too late. Inside the burnt house, they discovered the bodies of Christina Anderson, her son Ethan, and even the family dog. And while this could have been nothing more than a tragic accident, the reality was far more cruel. Later autopsy discovered severe injuries on Christina. These included signs of plastic cable ties around her ankle and arms, duct tape marks around her neck and mouth, multiple fractures in her right arm and both legs, a cut on her neck, and signs of at least 12 heavy strikes to the head. Her 8-year-old son Ethan also had multiple fractures throughout his body. However, despite the horrific scene, there were no signs of James or Hannah anywhere near the house. It didn't take long for investigators to connect the dots and realize that James DiMaggio was the mastermind behind this horrific crime. It also became clear that he had orchestrated the murders not just out of violence, but with the intent to kidnap Hannah. His actions were calculated even by some twisted obsession, as he took her from everything she had in her life. After learning about this, the police quickly issued a statewide Amber Alert in hopes of getting any information regarding James and missing Hannah's whereabouts. In the meantime, investigators also discovered security footage of James passing through the Border Patrol checkpoint in Pine Valley at around 10 p.m. This also prompted them to launch a massive manhunt spanning the entire Pacific coast from British Columbia to Baja California. However, despite the massive effort and the hundreds of man-hours put into the search, the manhunt turned up empty. Every lead seemed to result in a dead end, and the odds of successfully rescuing Hannah started to dwindle with every passing day. Things looked bleak. That is, until 3 days later, when 2 horseback riders spotted a man and a girl while trekking through the remote wilderness of Cascade, Idaho. They had seen the broadcast of Hannah's disappearance on TV and instantly recognized the young girl and her captor. They reported the sighting to authorities, who instantly began investigating the area, and soon after they found James's car with its plates removed to avoid detection. However, it still took them 3 more days to track down the campsite James was hiding in. The FBI had set up a jet with a sophisticated